Welcome to the Institute for Global Engagement's Faith and International Affairs conference call series. My name is Dennis Hoover, Vice President for Research and Publications at IGE, and I'll serve as the moderator on today's call. Thank you to everyone on the call. Our topic today is religious freedom in Viet country that faces complex questions about its development and future, especially regarding issues at the intersection of religion, culture, and law. Here to help us understand this complexity and the stakes involved is Hien Vu. Hien is Vietnam Programs Manager at the Institute for Global Engagement, in which capacity she frequently leads workshops on religion and peacemaking in Vietnam. Prior to joining 2007, Hien worked with the United Nations for Refugees in Hong Kong in the Voluntary Repatriation Program, and she also worked for World Vision Vietnam. Hien holds a master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies from Fresno Pacific University, and her publications include Engaging Communist East Asia, Recommendations for Religious Freedom, published in the Review of Faith and International Affairs. Before we get started, just a few words on today's call format. We'll begin with about 20 minutes of remarks from Hien, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. If you'd like to question, press 5* at any point during the call, and you'll be placed in the queue. Please also note that this call is on an audio recording will be made available on the IGE website. So, with that introduction, let's turn now to our call. Thanks again, Hien, for joining us today to share from your expertise and experience regarding religious freedom in Vietnam. The floor is yours.
Thank you much, Dennis, and thanks to everyone for joining the call today and for being interested in religious freedom in Vietnam. Well, if you have read recent reports about religious freedom in Vietnam, you might be confused. I would say most, if not all, the reports would list religion-related harassment and incidents occurring in Vietnam, but there are statements like, in overall, the situation is getting better, or it is getting better at the national level. So, what is really going on there? Look at some background information of Vietnam, because we would not have a full picture of religious freedom in Vietnam if we don't look at some key historical timelines of the country. Let's go back to 1975, the end of the U.S. and Vietnam War, when the communist government from the north of Vietnam took over the south from the southern government, which was backed by the United States. Most of religious practices and faith-based humanitarian organizations in the South were disrupted after 1975. Back then, there was a serious misunderstanding about religion from the Vietnamese government. They fear faith groups would become a political threat to the communist government because of the capacity that faith groups have for other people and their association with Western nations, such as the U.S. and Europe. And the government also feared that religious groups were mostly about being used and manipulated by politicians or the country's former imperialists. Religious life in the North at that time was not, of course, active at all. The communist government also saw that faith groups is a threat to the country's national defense. And so the religious groups were the target of being shut down or were closely monitored. For example, the Christian group, and I refer to both Protestant and Catholic groups, they were thought to be used by the American and the French. And of course, the French were kind of big enemies to Vietnam during the time. So many evangelical pastors and chaplains were put in jail in 1975 or years after that, and they were charged with supporting or being a CIA or secret agents of the American invaders. The Vietnamese government also thought the headquarters of the Protestants was based in the U.S. And another group of religion which was facing many difficulties was Cao Dai and Hoa Hao Buddhist groups, because they once had their own militia. So the fear of faith communities being a political threat made the religious situation in Vietnam a very long and dark chapter, I would say from 1975 to 2004, particularly resulting in religion-based violence in Central Highland in 2001. Well, in 2004, the State Department designated Vietnam as a country of particular concern. We often refer to it as CPC. This meant that Vietnam was found systematically persecuting religious individuals or groups. 2 years later, in 2006, Vietnam was taken off the CPC list by the State Department due to its improvement on religious freedom. So what did Vietnam do during the 2 years, from 2004 to 2006, so that it was taken off the list? While Vietnam developed a roadmap to improve the religious situation in the country, it made policies to address the need to register religious groups. Registered groups would be able to meet freely at either the house of a group members or just in a location that they chose. Out of several policies, there is one particular policy minister on Protestantism. It specifically said it would register worshiping sites for Protestant Christians. The number of Protestants by that time, 2006, was increased between 8 or 9-fold compared to 1975. The growth mostly took place in the mountainous areas in the northwest and central highlands, and most of new converts are ethnic minority people. The Vietnamese government saw the Christian or the Protestant growth as abnormal and immediately linked the growth to the government's assumption about Protestantism and the American invaders or to bad people. The growth of Protestants and the tie with the Vatican of the Catholics make the communist officials see Christians as a great threat to their authority. But CPC designation was a wake-up call for Vietnam. Vietnam did not want to miss out opportunities for its economic development because of CPC. CPC means there would be less foreign investment and less financial help from the U.S. With strong self-interest and push from outside, the Vietnamese government officials who worked on religion issues started learning about religion and how it might negatively or positively impact the society, politics, culture, and religions and state relations. Since 2006, Vietnam also began to openly talk about religious freedom in the country and have dialogues with other countries. I think we must note that even the religious freedom or human rights vocabularies were not out there in Vietnam probably before 2004. The lifting of CPC in 2006 allowed Vietnam to have more opportunities to learn about international standards on religious freedom. The learning comes in different forms. It includes academic exchange on relationship between religion and rule of law state, and government officials and scholars traveling to the U.S. and other developing countries to have first-hand experience about religious freedom. The officials started reducing negative stereotypes towards religion. The Governmental Committee on Religious Affairs started training local authorities at provincial, district, and commune levels on religion policies, relationship building between authorities and faith leaders, and religious organizations. In addition, religious groups also learn how to dialogue constructively and wisely with their local authorities about their faith. However, the provincial level local authorities have their own way of handling religious issues. Over the last 10 years, there has been ordinances, decrees, and directives about how and what to do administration or management over religious groups. Religion-based conflicts between government and faith groups are complex and often tied with other issues such as cultural clashes, land use policy, ethnic minority marginalization, negative stereotypes toward each other, between government and faith groups, or local government authorities not willing to apply the central government policy on religion in their community. there are incidents that on the surface they seem like religion-based conflicts, but they actually have a more complex background to it. For example, Protestant-related conflicts tend to include cultural and ethnic minority issues, especially in the Northwest and Central Highlands, as I mentioned earlier. And many Catholic-related conflicts are related to land use, unclear policies. So there is a need for relationship building and education on various subjects among both government and religious groups. At the national level, the Vietnamese government is trying to catch up with other nations on religion issues. Since the communist country opened up to the market, and they call it socialist-oriented economy in 1986, government officials have learned about the importance of rule of law and the importance of being a part of the world's economy and other social issues, including religious freedom and human rights. As entrepreneurship and the economy are growing and developing in Vietnam, coupled with the Internet age, information sharing has become uncontrollably transparent. When religious incidents happen, even in the most rural parts of the world, or in this case in Vietnam, can be captured, posted on the Internet, and sent to religious freedom and human rights advocacies around the world, religious individuals and groups now know how to take advantage of Internet to call for help from international organizations outside of Vietnam when they don't see opportunities or don't want to solve religious conflicts directly with their government. So far, religious freedom advocates are mostly from the U.S. The U.S. has various types of advocates, individuals and organizations as well. And the advocacy is on wide spectrum, from patient or constructive to vocal or very critical of Vietnam regarding how Vietnam handle religion. The U.S. is usually the first country to receive negative reports on religious freedom because the U.S. is well known as a home of many individuals and organizations that would listen and raise their voice for those who call for help. So I believe the U.S. Embassy in Vietnam and the State Department have held many dialogues on the religious freedom and human rights issues with Vietnam, which are very helpful for religious freedom progress in the country. The Vietnamese government knows well that the U.S. government will continue to raise its concern about freedom, rights, and democracy as both countries talk about closer ties in their bilateral relations. On the surface, the Vietnamese and the U.S. government seem to be different at some levels about religious freedom and human rights. Under the surface, as a Vietnamese researcher pointed out, Vietnamese and American people are the same when it comes to religion, but both are very religious and believe in positive contribution to the society if people of faith have freedom to do so. In the U.S., we often hear complaints about the U.S. government not doing enough about promoting religious freedom, or there is little help about protecting people from religious harassment in Vietnam. Well, in Vietnam, most of government officials think the U.S. government is doing too much about religious freedom in Vietnam, and that American politicians use religious freedom as a vehicle to win votes. Remember that there is no real civil society in Vietnam at this time, and people of faith would still tend to turn to American and other Western government and civil society for help when religion-based conflicts between government and faith groups arise. The most recent negotiations between the U.S. and Vietnam include TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the lifting of U.S. ban on arms sales to Vietnam. Religious freedom and human rights advocacies would want to see the U.S. government include requests for Vietnam to improve religious freedom and human rights records before agreement with Vietnam on these two areas. Vietnam might try to improve its human rights record in order to join TPP and receive the lifting of the U.S. ban on arms sales. This year so far, relations between Vietnam and China are something we need to look at in terms of geopolitics between Vietnam, China, and the U.S. So Vietnam and China are the two communist neighbors. They have been very, the relationship has been very tense since China deployed an oil rig to the South China Sea near Spratly Islands that Vietnam also claims ownership. The China-Vietnam tension might push Vietnam toward the U.S. A lot of Vietnamese people see this is an opportunity for Vietnam to get rid of China's long-term negative influence and become closer friends with the U.S. Well, there are two camps in the Vietnamese government now, pro-China and pro-U.S. If the pro-U.S. group wins, Vietnam-U.S. relations will improve faster and deeper, and religious freedom and human rights record of Vietnam will go up. If the pro-China group wins, Vietnam-U.S. relations would be improving slowly, and the road to religious freedom and human rights progress will have more bumps. So religious freedom landscape in Vietnam is that complex, politically, culturally, and socially. In this context, IGE creates mechanisms for respectful and open dialogues between government and faith groups about improving religious freedom in Vietnam. IGE and its country partners provide education on religion and rule of law to policy advisors, researchers, professors, and officials who work on religious affairs. We introduce comparative research on policies and law on religion from other countries. This hopefully helps Vietnam to make decisions as they prepare to draft a law on religion starting this year. At the local level, IGE collaborated with Committee on Religious Affairs, training on Vietnam's legal framework for religious freedom in the Northwest Highlands. IGE has also provided training on peace building to communities of faith. We are planning to do more peace building training and to facilitate religion and citizenship dialogues, bringing local authorities and faith groups together to talk about the positive role of faith in a community and plan our practical activities that two groups can do together to make their community a better place to live. So I'll include my summary with some good news. Looking at the religious freedom situation in Vietnam, I think it is going to get better. I traveled to Vietnam twice or three times a year in the past 7 years. I have seen changes of attitudes towards religion by the Vietnamese officials and also faith leaders towards government relations. This change resulted in more open policies by the government and openness in the society towards people of faith and religious conversion, and more importantly, more respect and tolerance between government and people of faith. When I see religious freedom in Vietnam, I don't see it through politics or social science. I see religious freedom in Vietnam with human life and dignity. When I read articles about corruption, I think of the justice that people or groups of faith feel called to fight for. When I see women and children, beggars on the street, I think about freedom for people of faith to help these beggars. Vietnam needs a better policy that allows more voices from the community of faith, a policy that addresses the needs of religious practices, freedom to conversion, and encourages the best of religion to contribute to the society. I believe Vietnam's religious freedom and religion and rule of law are going to be better. One Vietnamese government official told me Vietnam has opened to the world. It cannot go backwards now. I see this trend for religious freedom in Vietnam as well. Well, big progress does not happen overnight. Vietnam may not get everything right soon, but the Vietnamese government and people are working on the process of getting things right. The voice of researchers and scholars on religion is valuable to policymakers and the party now than 10 years ago, which is a good sign. Vietnam is open to learn from other countries' experience, both success and failure, and are working on their own rule of law on religion. And as far as I see, Vietnam welcomes help and needs lots of support so they can own the process to improving religious freedom. So that's my summary of the religious situation in Vietnam.
Thanks so much, Hien. Very insightful analysis and perspective. You've given us very much to chew on, and I'm sure our callers are eager to engage with you further on these issues. So we'll now open the lines for questions from the audience. As a reminder to audience members, if you'd like to ask a question, please press 5-star. When it's your turn to ask your question, today's call administrator, Megan Carner, will announce your name and unmute your line so that you may ask it. Lines will be placed back on mute immediately following the asking of a question. Also, please note that if you are in the queue and for any reason decide you no longer wish to ask your question, simply press 5-star again and your name will be erased from the queue. Finally, for the sake of other callers, I'll ask that when you're called upon, please immediately ask your question rather than providing your own commentary. So with that, Megan, our first question, please.
Yes, we have Kay Reihold. You may go ahead with your question, Kay.
Yes, it's Kay Reihold, and I'm working with the Montagnard Human Rights Organization and the Council of Indigenous Peoples in today's Vietnam. Hien, thank you for your fine commentary. My question is this: based on the feedback we have gotten from two newly arrived Jarai Montagnard tribespeople, two asylum seekers that have just arrived in North Carolina as refugees, the feedback that we've heard from them and from other family members of Montagnards who've returned to the Central Highlands is that there continues to be real persecution for those Montagnard Christians who have house churches, in other words, churches not registered with the government, the local authorities, and also a specific incident of pictures of Ho Chi Minh that the local authorities force Christian pastors to put in the house churches. I wondered, Hien, if based on your experiences, there seems to be a disconnect from this improvement that I'm hearing from you about religious freedom and the issue of religious freedom for not just the Montagnard indigenous peoples, but the Khmer Krom and the Cham. Thanks, if you'll answer my question.
Okay. So the about you mentioned about groups being harassed by local authorities, and the local authorities also kind of forced pastors to have Ho Chi Minh's Uncle Ho's picture on in their house. I've heard similar reports, and like I mentioned in my remarks, there is still a big gap between progress or improvement at national level, policymakers and central government, and the local authorities. And I think especially in the rural areas, and again particularly in Northwest and Central Highlands. So I hear you, and I hear the same reports from the Central Highlands now. Looking at those groups who are not registered with the local authorities, I think there are two types of those groups. The groups, so the first type of groups would be that they submitted their applications, but for some reason they would not register. And another type of groups is those groups who choose not to register with the local authorities because they think that if they register with the local authorities, they would have to send report, and they would have to inform the local authorities of their activities. So these are still the reality in Vietnam that I think the central government needs to do more training and needs to deal with their own officials. What is the second issue that you just talk about? Is that can you remind me of the second issue?
Megan, would it be possible to unmute the questioner's line again?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Kay.
we've lost the connection there. Okay, maybe let's move on to the next question.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question. Oh. The second question is to really a question and a comment. We just hope that IGE in its role in promoting dialogue will continue to encourage access to some of these areas with indigenous populations like the Cham in some of the coastal areas and the Montagnard tribes people in the Central Highlands, because unless you can actually visit and get feedback from people who are not afraid of repercussion, it's difficult to get an accurate sense of really what is happening with religious freedom. So if my question is if you could just continue to raise the issue of access to the Central Highlands and honest feedback from the villagers. A lot of these villagers are not fluent in Vietnamese language. Right. And that's also, you're going to have the translations that are not always accurate. And also there's fear. Sometimes there will be a government translator, as you well know. So we just appreciate any an accurate picture that you can get from a lot of these people in the Central Highlands and in the areas on the coast, where we also get reports about Cham faith communities being harassed by local authorities, and also the Khmer Krom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. And also looking at the situation of the Khmer Buddhists and the Cham communities, it's the issue of religious freedom, and also it's the relations between Vietnam and Cambodia as well. I know the tension between Vietnam and Cambodia is increasing nowadays because of the Cham, the Khmer communities and the land in that part of Vietnam. So, but yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question comes from Steve Spalding with One Challenge International. Steve, go ahead with your question.
Hello. I presume I'm on.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just interested in certainly understand your expertise and background, just certainly with the history there. And I'm not really an expert on Vietnam. I've lived in Southeast Asia for many years. But just wondered especially about the role that IGE or others could play in bringing national church leaders, strategic leadership in the church, I suppose that's mainly North-South Vietnam, the registered churches, into that dialogue with the authorities. So it's not just U.S.-based IGE personnel, but it's locals in that process where they're being educated, they're unified, and they're part of a reconciliation with authorities that may have even persecuted them in the past. And but I just wanted to know how involved the IGE is with church leadership in that process, or is there an avoidance of that just to make progress with these political authorities?
Right. IGE, we come in as a third party, and we see our role as a party that come in and help direct dialogues between government authorities and church leaders. So our role is to equip, encourage, and empower both groups, especially faith leaders or church leaders, in the process of reconciliation and dialogues with their government officials. We often work with our country partners, which are both government organizations and churches, and create a safe space for them, a political safe space for them to come together and talk to each other. Otherwise, those environments or those spaces do not exist at all out there.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Penelope Faulkner with the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination. Ms. Faulkner? may go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you. Yes, I'm calling you from Paris, in France. I'm a little bit probably odd man out of this discussion, but I just wanted to thank Hien for a very comprehensive and very informative presentation. I've been working, our organization, I have two hats, one which is exclusively with Vietnam, the Vietnam Committee on Human Rights, and we're very close to the Buddhist community. So I wanted to, my question would be really related to what IG has been working with the Buddhists, because our experience is working in Vietnam that unregistered, Buddhist, Vietnam is obviously a country where there is a diversity of religions, and which is very vibrant and very positive. It's a majority Buddhist country, and certainly the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam, which was the Buddhist organization but is banned by the communist authorities and supplanted by a state-sponsored Buddhist church, has been experiencing repression, over the past, 30 years. And its leader, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, has experienced various forms of detention, and he's now under house arrest. Effective house arrest. So I'd be interested to know what your experiences are of the Buddhist community. And I think what you were saying, we should be going tomorrow to Geneva to talk at the UN Human Rights Council about the visit of the UN rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, who was in Vietnam in July, and whose visit was seriously interrupted by the Vietnamese authorities. He was going to go to the Central Highlands and meet Christian communities, and his visits were interrupted. So for us, I'm happy to hear that on the long term you think that there are going to be improvements, but I think in the short term Vietnam is recognizing that religion is a serious problem, but it's not taking all necessary steps to listen to the Vietnamese religious communities. It was good, really good, that they invited the special rapporteur, but they did try to impede his meetings. And his analysis, and I'd like to hear your point of view on that, is that he said that autonomy, in other words, the system of registration, is basically extremely unfair. And he said that autonomy of religious organization is the litmus test of freedom of religion or belief in Vietnam. So I would like to have your opinion on that. And EPRID, which was mentioned as one of my titles, is we have also a platform in Europe, and I'd be very interested if we can work together, called the European Platform on Religious Intolerance and Discrimination, and we try to get a European Union to mainstream religious freedom in their policies and practices. So it's a bit of a long question, but I one, Buddhism, and second, on the autonomy of religions.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us from Paris. It's a privilege to have you on the call today. So I hear two issues there. One is about the Buddhist community in Vietnam. Well, not only the Buddhist community, but other religious groups who have different groups but same faith. They face the same issue as the Buddhists. There are some groups that are registered and some groups are not registered, and of course that would create a negative difference or I would say discrimination for those groups who are not registered. And like I mentioned earlier, there are two reasons why these groups are not registered. One, because the local authorities just have something that hold up the registration process, even though they receive the applications. And another reason is the religious groups just decide not to register at all. Now, for short-term solution or to address the immediate situation, if I were the religious groups, I would try my best to register so that it would help with the immediate need for members of the congregations or the religious groups to freely practice their faith. And then from there, they should continue to raise their voice or to continue their appeal or dialogues with government officials. So I know that the Buddhist group now have a few groups who are based in the country, or even Vietnamese Buddhist groups who are based in France or other countries, and are trying to register with Vietnam, but they even and they cannot get registration yet. So there is a need for further dialogue there. And second issues about the religious freedom, the UN rapporteur. Yes, I've read his press release, and I look forward to his final report. I hope it will come out soon. And all the obstacles and all the reasons that made his trip to Vietnam shorter, I think. And I've heard the same reports, and I think that is true in his statements. Now, for things like the people that met with the UN Special Rapporteur were interrupted by public security, or they were interrogated before and after meeting with him. I think it happens. And even for us, for IGE, when we travel to Vietnam, and now talking about IGE working transparently with the Vietnamese government on religious freedom, and we also train government officials on policy making and religion and rule of law. We are followed by public security as well. And to me, I think it's fine as long as as long as they just don't really put people in jail for meeting with us, or they just do their own job. And I think because of those things still happen at local level, and because public security are still out there and have really control of everything there, that's why continue working on religious freedom in Vietnam. And I guess that's why we have the call today.
Okay, thank you, Hien. Our next question in the queue comes from Rima Nashashibi with Nashashibi International Consultants. Rima, you may go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you for this conference call, very informative. What is the breakdown of the various religions in Vietnam?
If you, thank you for the question. I try not to include the religious demography in my remarks, because I think you might be able to look for it online. If you go to the annual report of International Religious Freedom of the U.S. State Department, then you would be able to find some statistics out there. It's really difficult to say how exact it is, I guess, for any statistics, but especially about religious demography in Vietnam. So just a quick snap of it, I think most of the statistics would say for Buddhist population it might be maybe 50% or more than 50%, and the majority of the Buddhists are majority ethnic group, the King, Vietnamese, and then maybe the second biggest Buddhist group is Khmer group, and then we have Roman Catholics, which is about 7%. Cao Dai Hoa Hao, another form of a mixed religion, is about 2.5%, and Protestants is about 1 to 2% of the population, and then you have Muslim, Baha'i, Hinduism, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Jewish, you name it. There are a lot of other groups in Vietnam, but those might be less than 100,000 people. And there are, and I think when statistics say the Buddhist population, which is about 50% or more than 50% of population, it might be overlapping with those who only do ancestor worship, or those who just go to the Buddhist pagoda or temple twice a month to pray for luck or for good fortune. And when you ask them, they would identify themselves as Buddhists, but they don't really practice the Buddhist Bible or don't belong to any specific temple or any Buddhist group at all. Yeah, so look online on the State Department International Religious Freedom Annual Report. You'll find good numbers there.
Okay, thank you, Hien. Our next question comes from Tony Tran with the Advisory Committee on Religious Freedom. Mr. Tran, you may go ahead with your question.
Yes, this is Tony Tran. I'm from the Conf Parishioner Association based in U.S. From what I heard about your point of view on the UN Special Rapporteur trip to Vietnam last July, what I want to ask you is, do you agree with his point of view on some of the limitation of the freedom of religion and some of the basic rights have been violated, like a limitation or ask people to register before they can perform their religious action. And one of the point that I want to point out here, especially because I am from the Conf Parish, is I don't know if you heard about that crackdown a few years ago. Yep. And one of the points.
I attended the hearing on the Kunzo years ago. Yeah.
Yes. And on Mr. Benefield's press release, he mentioned about the expropriation of land and other real properties of religious community is widespread. And Conyo is one of those occasions. So from what I know is the government, the central government is sending a team of from Hanoi to Da Nang to Conyo to investigate that issue and report to the Prime Minister by the end of this month, so that they have the solution to this issue, because it has been a huge issue with freedom of religion violation, where the local government tried to expropriate all the land of the people of the parish of the 135 years to relocate them to another place and sell the lot to investors. And would you, IGE, have any input to the government of Vietnam to see if they have a reasonable solution to the issue? Because this is a very important, not only to us, but this has been raised many times with the U.S. government and U.S. Congress to the Vietnamese government. That's the first question. Second question, I heard that you have some training for some people in Vietnam and outside of Vietnam about the mission of IGE so that they can help. I want to know, is there any people or any groups in Vietnam that IGE has been training to report violation of freedom of religion when it happens, and how many of them, or whether is that something that already available or in plan?
Great, thank you for your questions. Your questions about the report of the UN Rapporteur, as mentioned earlier, I think many things that the Rapporteur mentioned on the press release, I think it was true. And about religious harassment in Vietnam, we, IGE, because we've been in Vietnam for more than 10 years, and we've been to so many provinces, and so there are a lot of people in Vietnam who know how to contact us, and they just email us. And when there are religious incidents in Vietnam, yes, we get reports from Vietnam, and even from random people who just email us and say, "Hi, IGE, why these things still happen, and could you please help?" So what we do with the reports from Vietnam is Vietnam has established a hotline contact with the Ministry of Public Security. So when we receive reports on religious harassment, we often send the information that we receive to our government partners in Vietnam, and it includes the hotline that we have with the Ministry of Public Security. Sometimes I will send it to the Committee on Religious Affairs and our gateway partner, which is the Vietnam-USA Society. And we would ask them to corroborate the details of the incidents. And every time our president, Chris Saipo, traveled to Vietnam, we always encourage the central government to have some form of punishment and then make it public so people know that the central government does take action when the local authorities violate the central government's policies on religious freedom. And your other question about organizations in Vietnam that report on incidents in Vietnam, we don't intentionally establish any reporting line on religious activities, but like I said, we do receive the reports. And the way that IGE works is we would help to address the incidents that happen now. That's address the situation, but we see ourselves working more on creating positive change and creating a sustainable environment where the Vietnamese people, both government officials and people of faith, are a part of the process of making progress on religious freedom in Vietnam. And later on, we hope the Vietnamese people in Vietnam will own the process of improving the religious situation in Vietnam. Speaking from peace building or reconciliation perspective, that's where we see ourselves. And I know that there are still a lot of conflicts out there. There are a lot of tensions out there, and there are a lot of things that are not right for the people of faith and for the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Buddhists. But I think we are on the way of helping at least two groups, government and groups of faith, coming together and making things right to each other and for the betterness of Vietnamese people, in general.
Okay, thank you, Hien. Our next question comes from Min Ding Tang. Min, you may go ahead with your question.
Yes, Ms. Hien Vu, thank you for the very interesting presentation. I have two questions. You mentioned that IGE has worked to create safe space for dialogue between, on the one hand, the government, and the other hand, the religious communities. I wonder whether you also include persecuted religious communities known to be persecuted, namely those who have tried to register but have been denied, or those who have decided not to register. By persecution, for instance, we have reports, we have interviewed, not long ago, just April this year, of families where their family members were tortured to death, for instance. The wife of a deacon got raped in prison, in detention, and then her husband got tortured to death as well. Other family members, when they filed a complaint against that death in custody, they were persecuted. So we are talking about atrocities. So clearly these are persecuted communities of religious people. So would it be safe? Would it be possible to create a safe space for these people to be at the table at the same time as the government officials? And in light of especially the press statement from the Special Rapporteur, who deems that independent religious activities in Vietnam should be extremely unsafe and restricted. That is the first question. Is it possible for IGE to be the mediator between the government and, on the other hand, extremely persecuted communities? My other question is about registration. According to the Special Rapporteur, and we also have been always advocating for that, the requirement to register religious activities is in itself a disrespect for freedom of religion, because that is the right. It is a human right, basic human right, and people should be able to exercise that right regardless of whether the government approves or not. So registration should be presented as an offer and not a requirement. So shouldn't we work towards the abolishment of that requirement to register altogether? Why should we play the same game, which is actually disrespecting and discouraging freedom of religion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Anh Thắng, for the comment and questions. I agree with you that at the end of the road, we should work in a way that registration is no longer there. Or if it is there, then it should be a very simple process, and that process should have authorities or government really working on registering the faith groups. Now, the good news, I talked to a researcher and policy advisor of the Vietnamese government, and he recognized the weakness of the registration policy and the process. It only addressed the situation. It doesn't work in the long run if Vietnam wants to have real religious freedom in the future. So I talked to this researcher who is also policy advisor to the Vietnamese government, and I'm so glad that his thinking really has changed. And he said, even on the Vietnam's major policy on religious freedom now is Decree 92, and the ordinance that issued in 2004, it's a management over religious activities. In Vietnamese, it say quản lý tôn giáo. Then he said it should not be quản lý tôn giáo. It should not be management or administration over religious activities, but Vietnam should change the understanding and also the language on the policy. It should just say register religious groups. So he said what the Vietnamese government should do is they should just register the group so that when it comes to the time of statistics, the government would know how many religious groups out there. So the government should not use this registration to manage or administer religious activities. And I was glad to hear that during my most recent trip to Vietnam in July. Now, your question about if IGE is able to create a politically safe space for the extreme persecuted groups of faith. Now, if for us now, the participants of our training or our dialogue so far, are mostly at national level and also at provincial and district level as well. And if the groups that if the groups who were extremely persecuted by the government, if they see that there is a need, or if they wanted to invite IGE to come in and mediate or reconcile between this group and the Vietnamese government, do let us know. You know where to find me, and so just email me and we'll work from there.
Thank you, Hien. We have time for one more question, and that will come from Jim Lewis with Bethel University. Jim, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Hien, for this helpful summary, and also for the opportunity for us to hear one another in dialogue. I was the beneficiary of an IGE delegation back in 2006. Here's my question, Hien. In the 2013 report of the International Religious Freedom of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, in their very brief paragraph on, quote, improvements in respect for religious freedom, it says changes were primarily the result of further revisions to the legal framework. We are coming up now, or we are really 10 years out from the 2004 Ordinance Regarding Religious Beliefs and Religious Organizations, FAPLAN, as well as the Prime Minister's Special Instruction regarding Protestantism. These are the kind of the benchmark changes that have come. They're 10 years old. What are the changes in the legal framework in these last 10 years of significance that you think are hopeful for the future?
First, I think the Vietnamese government, I think I know that they organized some section or some meeting to review all the legal framework that they had last 10 years. And so they issued Decree 92, which is a revision of the ordinance issue in 2004. Now, I've heard controversies over this revised Decree 92 as well. When I talked to the officials at the Committee on Religious Affairs, they said this Decree 92 will help, or they hope it will help to reduce about half time of waiting for those faith groups who seek registration, and it also reduce a lot of paperwork, or evidences from faith groups who want to register their religious practices. Now, but I've heard good stories and bad stories from groups of faith. Some people think Decree 92 really help. They get registration quickly and no problem at all, but some groups reported still having problem with registration. So the good thing is the Vietnamese government is looking at their legal framework, and they also, and at the central government level, they recognize the bad practice by the government's local authorities at local level in terms of implementing and handling religious issues at local level. So, and I know that Vietnam has decided to go ahead and draft a law on religion study. I think they just decided to do it this year. So, the way I see it is now there are a lot of government officials who have been trained through IGE's programs, and it's both conferences, and we had 10-day training on religion and rule of law, and we had researchers, policy advisors, and scholars who were there. So I think Vietnamese policymakers, they have almost enough models and policies from many, many countries that they can learn from. And I think the Vietnamese government and people have learned the hard way in terms of religious incidents and harassment. So I hope that they would come out with a much better policy. Especially, it would deal with harassment at local level, and also establish a legal that allows faith groups or people of faith to even bring the local authorities to the court or something like that when it comes out, or when the new policy comes out. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Well, thank you, Hien. A very illuminating conversation indeed. And thank you to all of our callers for joining us today. And I hope you'll join us again for our next Faith and International Affairs conference call, which will be on Thursday, September 25. Then we'll be discussing the role of faith-based trauma healing in post-conflict societies. And our speaker will be Pat Miersma, who is a leading expert in the area of crisis intervention and community-based trauma recovery. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.